Today we'll discuss one of the most contentious issues that can arise for separated parents, not custody, but access, the question of how to allocate a child's time between the parents.
Brought to you by advicescene.com. Free legal answers from verified lawyers.
Regardless of who has custody, and even when there's joint custody, the fact remains that a child cannot be in two places at once. Many parents have great difficulty coming up with a parenting schedule that maximizes the child's time with each parent. Today, we're privileged to welcome a family court judge to talk frankly about the legal and practical principles that courts apply in making access decisions. Judge Jane Cartwright, thank you so much for joining us today on Family Matters.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
I know that it's extremely rare for a judge to appear in the media. I personally think it's a very important aspect of what we do to educate the public, but I want to make it clear, and I know you do too, that the opinions that you express today are yours and not necessarily reflective of the bench.
That's right. They're mine, and I'm not representing the provincial court bench at this time.
And with that out of the way, I thought we should start right off the bat by making it clear to people when they talk about parents' rights, mothers' rights, fathers' rights, in terms of access. It's really the right of the child, isn't it?
Absolutely. The children, they're not TV sets. They are people, they have rights, and they're not owned by either parent. The parents have the privilege and the honor of raising them, and when they fall apart, we step in to help out.
I often tell parents, parents actually don't have rights, they have obligations. It's the child's right.
That's right.
To have a relationship with both parents. In my opinion, and I've been doing this as long as you, we were both appointed judges around the same time, and we've known each other a long time. I think access cases are the most contentious cases we get in court.
They are. They have more ways to go wrong, and they also, I think, they're the tip of the iceberg in terms of the parents' relationship. So down below that, there's all that bitterness and resentment, and so those are the real big issues. We can't help with those. We can help with the access issues that sort of boil up from the problems the parents had with themselves.
But it always amazes me that people seem to have, people who can't get along and just cannot put aside their anger and their bitterness, can't even agree on very basic things like what time it'll start and end and where the pickup and drop off will take place. I guess you're right, it's really about much more than just that issue. Sometimes I get the feeling they're not really arguing over the children at all.
They aren't, and I think that's why they're grateful when we step in sometimes and we say, look, here's what I would normally do, or here's a really good example of something that'll work, let's do that. And they're almost grateful to say, okay, as long as I don't have to give in to his wishes or make him, he won't agree with me or that sort of thing.
You know, I have noticed in the last few years an increase in the conflict that we see in court, a lot more new relationships. What I mean by that are like short-term relationships where the parties broke up even before the child was born or right after. I see a lot more what I call baby cases. Very young babies, they might still be breastfeeding, or very young infants. Do you find those particularly challenging in determining how to do a visitation schedule?
I think those are the worst because of the child's needs and because of the breastfeeding issues and because the parents had no relationship to build on. So that often the mom does not trust the dad at all, and it's very hard to leave your baby with someone you don't trust. It's almost impossible. All of your instincts say, don't do it. And I always tell the moms, look, I'm a mom, I understand that, I know how I felt. Although I wasn't separated, but I know how it felt. And I tell the dads, you've got to understand how she feels, and you've got to have shorter access. It's got to be more frequent, shorter. When the child doesn't care what I've said in the court order. When that child wants to be fed, going back to mom, because that's the other thing is we don't interfere with breastfeeding.
So what happens in the case of a breastfeeding child? What it would be a typical, and I realize it's different case by case, and no one watching this should think that this is going to necessarily apply to them, but generally, what's the ballpark idea of what would be an appropriate access visitation schedule, let's say for a child who's 3 months old?
Well,
and the parties may be separated very early on in the child's life.
Yeah, you'd have to find out what the child's needs are, what the mother's concerns were, how far apart they live, because they're going to have frequent access, maybe every other day access for a couple of hours. You've got to look at nap schedules, feeding schedules. Mom has to be nearby. So there's a huge amount of things to take into account. And often moms say, well, I don't want him taking care of this baby. He's never done it before. And I always say, well, we were all like that. At some point, we're all new parents. So maybe he needs to be with you for a few hours to see what you do, that sort of thing, just to make sure that he knows how to best comfort the baby and so on.
What if they can't get along well enough for them? Because I think that's a wonderful idea. I think mom would get a great comfort out of being able to show dad exactly what the routine is. But what if they just can't be together? I mean, we get people with restraining orders that can't have any contact.
Yeah, and that's typical too. And so then I say, well, who else knows this baby well enough and can show dad what to do? Because I tell the mom, look, it can't be supervised just because you're worried about him. We don't supervise access for these reasons. So maybe at first for a few sessions, but really, do you have a grandma? Do you have a mom? An aunt? Your sister? We find someone. There's always somebody who's willing to help out, show dad.
What if the person that's willing is on dad's side of the family and is also a total stranger to the child? My personal worry about that is that now you're putting the child with two people that the child's not very familiar with, as opposed to one.
Well,
are you okay with that?
If the purpose of supervision is to have the child be with somebody the child knows, to ease into the relationship with the dad, and we're just saying dad because often it's the dad that's the access parent.
I guess we should make that clear, that it could be the other way around.
Yeah. Except for newborns, usually it's the dad
usually,
that's
yes.
And so in that situation, no, we want to find someone the child knows and can be comforted by and ease into the relationship with the dad.
Now, moving on to kids that are, let's say, 3, 4, 5. You probably have heard a million times, I think if we each had a nickel for every time a parent said, my child doesn't want to go, we'd both be millionaires. What do you say to a parent who says that? My 4-year-old does not want to go.
I have to stop laughing because I've had a couple of 4-year-olds, and I say, well, oh, come on now. My 4-year-old did not want to brush her teeth. One of them refused to go to school. Another one wouldn't wear anything unless it was these pink pajama bottoms to school. I mean, I think they were, so they're 4. You ease them out of it. And
I've never met a kid yet that wanted to go to the dentist.
No. You ease them out of it. And I said to the moms, you know how to do that. You know how to ease them into something they don't want to do. You know how to do that. They do.
And on that note, we're going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to be asking Judge Cartwright about supervised access. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Family Matters and our discussion on access with our very special guest, Judge Cartwright. I'm so thrilled to have a judge come on the show because people just don't get to hear from a judge unless they're in the courtroom themselves. And sometimes I think that if they could get this information beforehand, they might have more informed decision-making powers.
I do see a lot of people that come into court with all kinds of myths and misperceptions in their head, and I set them straight, and it's too bad they didn't know that earlier.
Well, I think you're making a great contribution by helping to educate the audience. Let me ask you about supervised access. There are cases, aren't there, where the court is concerned about safety issues. And in those cases, we require that the parent having the visitation be supervised. Can you give us some sense of when those alarm bells go off and that you would make that kind of order?
Well, first of all, a lot of our supervised access orders occur before any trial, so we haven't really heard the whole story. We've heard allegations, and so we need to make it safe because the child's safety comes first. And so those alarm bells, and they may not pan out, but the other person needs to have access, and we need to make sure it's safe. So it's usually things like allegations of untreated or untreatable alcohol or drug dependencies, violence. Perhaps. Although if there's allegations that you've been violent with the child, I'm not sure I'm going to order any access. That's not a for sure thing you're going to get access. There may be untreatable mental health issues. That gives an alarm bell as well. That makes access supervised.
What do you say to parents who are non-custodial parents that say, look, these are just allegations, these are just accusations that are being made against me because the other parent doesn't want me to have a relationship with the child?
I tell them, look, I understand your point of view, but I can't decide that right now. It'll be an interim court proceeding or a mediation. I'll say we don't have time to have the full trial right now. When we have the trial, that's when we're going to hear from you. But until then, I want to make sure you've got access. And the only way I can order it is by supervision.
And who is the supervision by? Because you could send them to an access center if there's one in your community, or have a family member do it. Do you have criteria that are generally applied in the law to when you choose one way over the other?
Well, in my area, of course, we don't have an access center. So we have some paid access supervisors that we can use, but it's too expensive for most people. So I look to family members. Can you both agree on someone? That's fine. If they can't agree on someone, I'll say, come on, go out, come back next week, bring me lists of people that are acceptable. How about your church? And some people, for example, I'll have a father that says, look, I know my access has to be supervised. My mom's willing to do it. She's a registered nurse. She has no criminal record. And I'll say to the mom, well, what's wrong with her? Well, I don't like her. Well, no. Do you think she'll stand idly by while the father smokes crack cocaine? No. No, she's not going to. Do you think she's going to allow him to hit the child? No grandmother would. No. So I said, you think of it that way. It doesn't have to be someone that you are really fond of.
You know, you've hit on such an important point that the feelings between the adults seem to cloud what should be a very child-focused exercise. And I guess when you tell them that, do you sense that the light goes on and that they get it?
Sometimes, especially when I use examples like I just used with you, a humorous one sort of makes them laugh and then they sort of think about it. So I think sometimes that does, sometimes they are listening to me.
But you know, there's this, and sometimes not, there's a subtext, though, to what you said, that if I were a grandparent watching this program, I would be thinking, it's very important that I not sever my relationship with my child's ex, because I don't want that person's negative feelings about me to impact on my visitation with the child, too.
And grandparents, you know, grandparents, as far as I'm concerned, they enrich children's lives.
Immensely.
But they don't have as many rights. Well, in British Columbia, in any event,
anywhere,
as custodial parents and biological parents. And so it's almost like the custodial parent has the child hostage for them. You know, they've got to get along with them to keep their access on, and it's sad.
But they shouldn't take sides. Grandparents really shouldn't take sides.
No, hard for them though.
Very.
Hard.
But if the smart ones know not to take sides in the dispute, they will have a better chance, I think, of being available. And in the supervised situation, what could be better than a stranger or somebody you have to pay?
Right.
Now,
absolutely.
It's very important to touch on domestic violence. It's a fact of life. We have dedicated an episode on that topic, and one of your colleagues was here talking about it. What do you say to parents who have been victimized by domestic violence and who say to you, I don't ever want that person to see their child again. I was abused.
Well, that must be a horrible situation for those people. What I talk to them about is, or what I find out is, what happened is this long-standing pattern of abuse. Was it a one-off situation? Not that that's okay, but what happened here? And is there any likelihood that that person would be violent with the children? And that people can be really terrible spouses to one another, but perfectly adequate parents. So
that's a big point you just made. I think that's huge. That the fact that this person may not have been a good partner for you does not necessarily say they were a bad parent. Of course, if the child witnessed the violence, I suspect you'd take that into account.
I'm going to need some expert opinions then, psychologists, that kind of thing. I'm not going to delve into that one using common sense principles, because I'm going to need some expert help when it comes to that.
But I think we all agree that children who witness their parents arguing and fighting, that's a form of child abuse.
It's horrible for them.
And it's very understandable why a child will be afraid to have contact.
And yes, and it continues. Sometimes the fighting continues on at access exchanges, and that's absolutely unacceptable. And the children see it happening at access exchanges, and that affects them.
And the conflict can sometimes develop into as a result of new situations. I often get custodial parents saying, "All right, he or she can have access to the child, but I don't want their new partner to be with my child."
It's true.
Even though this person's it's a new person. I always find it humorous because I think, well, this person was attracted to you at one time. They must have fairly good taste. Why are you so worried about this person having contact with your child?
Well, you know what they're worried about. They're worried about being supplanted as in their role. where the stepmom may sort of take over their role.
So what do you say to them?
Well, just common sense things I say to them. Look, you can't tell him who he sees, just as he can't tell you who you see.
And children do have to get to know these other extended, remember, I mean, this is what we put kids through, don't we?
Sometimes they're helpful. Sometimes they're the helpful barrier between the two parents. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they add, fuel to the fire.
But wouldn't it be smart for them to get to know each other? If I were a parent and my child were going to the other parent's home, I would want the other parent's partner to be my best friend because I want them to be nice to my child.
It's true. And I bet you that happens, but not with the people that we see.
Oh, there it is.
We just see the unrepresented, or the sort of the sample that's not very representative of step parents, right? So we see the ones where it's just not working out. I'll tell you the worst thing that a step parent can do to the other parent is to cut the child's hair, especially a little girl's hair.
Never cut the hair.
If you cut the hair, oh my goodness,
it's
that
over.
makes the mother or father very
it's
upset.
over.
Yep.
Of course, if you're bald like me, not an issue.
Yeah.
We will be right back after this message. We are back with our guest, who is a family court judge with many years' experience, and we're talking about access. Judge Cartwright, do you get cases where the custodial parent says, I'm not being told where this child is being taken, I don't even have the address of the other parent, no contact information at all? I get it all the time.
Yeah. I do too, and it's unacceptable to not know where your child is. You have to know where your child is living and going. But then I have it to the other extreme. Sometimes parents want to know if the child goes 3 places that day, which friends are they going to see, and then, no, you don't have to report like that. But you need to know where your child lives and the phone number, and maybe you want to phone them, and maybe if you live a long distance, you want to Skype them, which is a great service for them.
Do you impose any restrictions over how much phone contact there can be? Because when I ask the other parent, well, why haven't you given the custodial parent your phone number and your address, I will invariably hear some complaint that I'm being harassed, I'm being called all the time.
Yeah, and now they can bring me records if that's occurring, and then I'll say, fine, you two contact by email or text, because that leaves a record, right? Unless it's an emergency. Or, but there are problems with telephone calls with kids in between access visits, and so that goes wrong a lot. And with little kids, I'm telling them, look, a 2-year-old is not going to talk to you on the phone. A 4-year-old isn't. Most aren't. They don't want to talk on the phone.
So just let it go.
Just let it go. Or,
I tell parents that too.
Yeah.
Your 2-year-old is not going to be in therapy 20 years from now because you didn't call that child on the Wednesday night.
That's right.
What about the pickup and drop off? It's such a huge issue.
It is.
Some people complain about chronic lateness or no-shows. Do you ever say, fine, do it at a police station where I will know whether you really showed up or not?
No, I don't like it at the police station. What kind of a message does that give to the children? Also, I don't know if the police really like that. I like, McDonald's or a playground or somewhere where the kids can run around and play while you wait.
But where's the proof if each of them are coming back saying, he didn't show up, or she didn't show up, or so-and-so was late, and the other one says, that's not true, I was there?
Actually, I do a little stern talking to and tell them to stop wasting my time with these stupid problems and get on to the real ones. I do, and often that sort of works. But if that doesn't work, I will have the person that's picking up will pick up to start the access visit, and then the other person go and pick them up when it's the end. And that way, that tends to work out.
Now we have very little time left, but I do want to ask you about Christmas, holidays, March break, summer vacation, such stressful times. I always say whoever invented Christmas could not have been divorced.
No.
Or there would have been 2.
I start getting my litigants ready for Christmas in September. I start saying, have you thought about Christmas access? Let's talk about that. Because
Any
I hate
rules of thumb?
December 23rd.
Yeah.
Well, the rules of thumb.
They all show up December 23rd.
And I'm always on duty. It ruins, it's horrible for me, actually, because there's a lot of yelling and screaming. But I always tell them Christmas, look, just divide it in half with Christmas Day alternating between the parties, or swap the whole thing from year to year. Or if the kids are really little, do a shortened version of that if they can't handle like a week with one parent and a week away.
Good tips. The 40% rule. The child support guidelines say that if you have your child in your care more than 40%, you may not have to pay the full amount of child support. What do you do when a parent comes in and says, I'd like 41% of my child's time?
Yeah, I'm saying, no, we're not going to do it based on that. We're going to do this based on what's going to work for the child and what's going to work for both of you. We're going to keep that separate. And it may not work in any event. You may have to pay the full shot.
That's, I think, a really big point. Yeah. Even if you have a child in your care, even 50% of the time, it doesn't mean that there's no child support payable, because you have to look at the disparity in the standards of living in both homes, and if one parent's income is way higher than the other, you might have to even it out.
Right.
So a child isn't poor in one home and rich in the other.
That's right.
I hope people are listening to that. What about access enforcement? You've made your access order, you've said it's going to take place at this dates and times, and there's non-compliance. I look them in the eye and I say, I have heard and seen every single excuse there is not to deliver the child for access. And a number of things are going to happen. I might find you in contempt of court, in which case you could go to jail or be fined. And I've actually never had to go that far. I threatened to do it. There can that
be
doesn't mean she won't in the future, though.
Doesn't mean I won't. I might. There's also police.
I've had to do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. There's also police enforcement where the police can go and get them. And I say, I never want to do that. I never want the child to be dragged out of, mom's arms over to dad by a police officer. How scary is that? That's not going to happen. I'd rather send the parent to jail than do that to the child. I always tell them that. And
if it's severe enough, though, you could actually change custody.
Yes, and and that you can tell them that too. That the person who will win custody is the one that's most likely going to allow a good relationship with the other parent.
We have very, very little time left, but it strikes me that a lot of what we talked about today are not legal issues at all. It's about two people getting over their emotional baggage and moving on for the child's sake.
Yeah, it is. You're absolutely right.
There's got to be a better way than having a stranger like you and me who don't know these people, don't know their children.
Well, I do one thing in mediations. I often ask for a picture of the child, and we look at the picture, and parents have a harder time maintaining their levels of hostility when the child's right there, the photo, in the room.
I love that idea. I'm going to start doing that.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining us, Judge Cartwright. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you.
From everyone here at Family Matters, thank you so much for watching. See you next time.